The mule stopped before we did. Ears back, nostrils working the thin air. Front hooves planted on the switchback like she'd read something in the rock we hadn't. I hauled the lead rope anyway. Tuesday, the 14th of September, 1886. And we'd been climbing since first light, 9,000 feet, and still going. The pines gone stunted and sparse around us. The sky that hard blue you only get above timberline. Then the trees broke, and there it was. Slabs, dozens of them, maybe more, laid out across the slope like a graveyard nobody bothered to fence. White marble going gray under 2 years of weather, veined through with rust-colored streaks. Half of them already sunk, crooked into the scree, where the frost had worked under their edges. A derrick stood off to the north, timber gone silver, its cable slack and pooled in the dirt like something dead. My brother didn't say anything for a long while. He had the journal out before I'd even got the mule's lead tied off, scratching at it with that stub of pencil he kept behind his ear, and I knew without looking that he was writing down the smell of it. Cold stone, wet moss, the tang of rust bleeding out of rock that had no business rusting. "Nobody's worked this in a season," he said. "Maybe 2. I found the foreman's shack first, door hanging by one hinge, glass gone from both windows, but the chalkboard was still nailed up inside, half legible under a skin of dust and damp. Rejected, 61. Accepted, 4. 61 slabs. Somebody's whole year of cutting, written off in a column of tally marks, and underneath, in smaller letters, gone soft with water damage. Flawed stone, iron ribbon, unfit for finish work. I walked back out into the light and looked at the ribboning again. Thin lines of rust red running through white, straight as a plum string, following some grain I couldn't yet read. It didn't look like rot to me. It looked like something drawn on purpose. "We're not hauling that," my brother said, before I'd said a word. "We've got $41 and a mule we don't own outright. We came up here to see if there was work, not to move a mountain. We came up here because a man in Granite Forks said there was stone nobody wanted. Nobody wanted it for a reason." I looked at the tally board again. 61 marks, all in the same steady hand. No hesitation in a single stroke of chalk. A man doesn't write a number like that unless he believes it. But belief isn't the same as truth, and I'd learned that much on the road already, the hard way, more than once. "We'll ask," I said. "Before we decide anything, we ask." My brother closed the journal. Somewhere below the shack, past a stand of dead spruce, smoke was rising, thin, gray, and steady, the kind a man keeps going because he has nowhere else to be. We went down toward the smoke with the mule on lead, and the light going flat behind the ridge. $41 in a tobacco tin, a mule bought on credit from a man in Granite Forks, who'd wanted 50 and taken 35, and a promise, a hand axe, a Sharps rifle we'd carried between us since our father's place got sold out from under us. That was the whole of what we owned in the world, and I counted it again, walking down that slope, like counting it twice would make it more. The shack sat against a cut bank, half dug into the mountain, stovepipe crooked, one window boarded. The old man who came out wore a coat too big for him, the shoulders hanging past where his own shoulders ended, and he watched us come the way a man watches weather, not afraid of it, just waiting to see what it would do. "You the two been up at the pit," he said. "Not a question." "Looking it over," my brother said. "Heard there might be stone worth taking, if a man was willing to work for it. Heard wrong or heard right, depends who's telling you." He looked at the mule, at the rifle across my brother's back, at me, last, longest. "Company folded in June. Owes me 11 months' wages, and I expect I'll die owing. Marble's condemned on paper. Nobody's title to it but the bank, and the bank don't know it's here." "Then whose is it?" I said. "Mine, near as truth goes. Not near as law goes." He said it flat. No bitterness in it that I could hear. though I'd come to learn later there was plenty, just buried deep and old. My brother didn't waste time circling it. That was his way, decide fast, live with it slow. We'll cut what we can and haul it to Granite Forks, sell what sells. You get a share for letting us take it off the mountain. The old man was quiet long enough that I thought he hadn't heard. Then, I don't want money off it. Money's already ruined once by this stone. He looked past us, up toward the pit, the way a man looks at a grave he visits regular. You put my name on whatever paper you carry, whatever ledger, whatever bill. I want it written that I was here. That's the whole of my price. My brother nodded like it cost him nothing, though we both understood there was no clean paper to write it on, no deed, no title, nothing but a folded company and a bank that had forgotten this mountain existed. Done, he said. The old man turned back toward the shack without another word, like the matter was settled, and further talk would only cheapen it. I stood there with the mule breathing steam beside me, looking up at the darkening line of the ridge, thinking about 61 chalk marks, and a hand that never once shook making them, and wondering what a man does with 11 months of unpaid wages and no bank left standing to collect from, wondering what he does instead with 2 strangers who happened to walk up his mountain in September. We didn't ask him about the stone that night. We ate our beans cold, because the fire was low and none of us had the will to feed it, and we listened to the wind work the loose shingles on the shack roof like it was looking for a way in. It was the old man who brought it up himself, the next morning, Wednesday, the 15th, with the sky the color of a knife blade and no wind at all. He walked us up to the pit before we'd finished our coffee, stood at the lip of it, with his hands behind his back, like a preacher, looking over a congregation that had stopped coming to church, pointed down at the near wall, where a band of rust-colored streaking ran through the white stone in a long diagonal, maybe 8 inches wide, snaking down through 40 feet of rock like something had bled into it 1,000 years back and never stopped. That's what they called the flaw, he said. Iron. Company man come up from Denver in the spring of '68, took one look, wrote a report, saying the whole vein was compromised, said it'd bleed rust into anything you polished it into, said no buyer'd touch marble with staining like that running through it. He said this the way a man recites something he has said to himself alone for 18 years, worn smooth from repetition, no heat left in it, only the shape of the old grievance. My brother crouched at the edge and touched the stone with 2 fingers, like he could read something off it that way. Does it bleed? He asked. Not if you cut with the grain. The old man said it flat, no argument in his voice, just fact laid down like a plank. That ribbon runs the same direction as the bed. You cut across it, sure. You'll open it up. Water gets in over years. It'll weep rust down the face of whatever you made. Cut along it. He made a slow motion with his hand, flat and level. It stays sealed forever, far as I ever seen. I quarried block off that same wall for 6 years before the buyout. Never had one piece bleed on me. Not one. Then why'd the report say different? The old man didn't answer that directly. He looked at the ribbon a long while, like it might answer for him. No buyer ever tested it, he said finally. Report came out. Company folded the pit inside a season, and that was the end of anybody asking questions about grain and bed and which way a man cuts a slab. He turned from the pit and started back down toward the shack, boots crunching the frost-stiffened grass, and left the 2 of us standing there with the whole gray face of the mountain open in front of us, 61 chalk marks behind us, in a shack that smelled like coal oil and old wool, and a claim about iron and stone that no one, in 18 years, had troubled themselves to prove or disprove. We didn't ask anybody's permission for what we did next. Nobody left to ask. We spent 2 days building the sledge before we moved a single block. Oak runners, cut from a stand of trees a half-mile down the ridge, pegged and lashed with rawhide, We boiled soft first. My brother wanted iron straps. We didn't have iron to spare. We had rope, and rope had to do. The switchback trail dropped near 900 feet in under a mile. 6 turns cut into the mountain, by men who'd known what they were doing, and were long gone now. We rigged a brake system off a stump at the first bend, doubled rope around the trunk, played out slow, 1 man on the sledge steadying, 1 man on the brake letting line run through his hands a foot at a time. Simple in the telling, not simple in the doing. First slab we moved was 400 pounds of gray stone with that same rust ribbon running through it, and we eased it onto the sledge on the morning of the 16th, a Thursday, frost still on the grass. I took the brake. My brother rode the downhill side of the sledge with a pry bar, keeping it square on the ruts. We made 40 yards before the rope caught wrong around the stump, some old scar in the bark I hadn't seen, and it jumped, and slack ran out too fast, and I heard it before I understood it, that low singing hiss of hemp under a weight it wasn't built to carry. The rope parted. The sledge went. My brother went with it. Not thrown, worse than thrown, dragged. 1 boot caught between the runner and a rock, the whole rig sliding for the second bend, where the trail just stopped being trail and became 40 feet of open air over broken talus. I don't remember deciding to move. I remember being at the second bend before the sledge was, don't know how, and getting a hand on his coat collar and hauling backward with everything 2 years on a mule trail puts into a man's back, and his boot tearing loose from where it was pinned, and the 2 of us going down hard in the frozen grass, while the slab and the sledge and 80 feet of good rope went over the edge and broke apart on the rocks below, with a sound like a rifle shot inside a barrel. We lay there a while. Neither of us said anything worth remembering. That slab was gone, cracked into pieces no bigger than a wash basin, and I counted that as the cost of not knowing yet what we were doing. We rebuilt the brake with a stouter stump and a longer scope of rope, and we went slower after that. 300 pounds at a time instead of 4, 1 turn of the trail at a stretch, resting the line at every bend to check it for wear. 11 days it took us, start to finish, to bring down what was left standing on that mountain. And by the last afternoon, my hands had gone through 2 pairs of gloves, and my brother's boot heel was held on with wire. Granite forks sat where the trail gave out into flat ground, a rail depot and a row of false front buildings, and enough noise after 11 days of mountain quiet to make a man flinch. We had 11 slabs stacked on a borrowed freight wagon, dust in every crease of our clothes, and $41 that had shrunk some over 2 years of flour and rope and horseshoe nails. My brother wanted to eat first. I wanted to find a man who cut stone. There was one. Name of a stonecutter's shop painted on a window 3 doors from the depot, and inside, a heavy-set man with lime dust worked into the lines of his hands, who came out to look at what we'd hauled and put his palm flat on the first slab, like he was checking a horse for fever. He asked where it came from. I told him. He straightened up slower than he'd bent down, said he knew the quarry, said everybody in 3 counties knew the quarry, knew it had been condemned, knew the company had folded and walked away from the paper on it years back, said he wasn't cutting 1 inch of stone off a mountain nobody owned clean, not without a bill of sale with a name on it that meant something, because the last man who'd sold him timber off a claim in dispute had cost him a summer in a magistrate's office, defending title that wasn't his to defend. We stood outside his shop a while after that, the wagon creaking under its own weight, my brother quiet in the particular way he got quiet when he was doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. There wasn't a clean title. There never had been. The company that condemned the stone had walked off the deed same as everything else, and the old man in the foreman's shack had no paper to his name at all. Only 11 months of owed wages and a memory of ground he'd walked before either of us was born. I thought about it one night in the wagon bed, my brother asleep beside me with his boot still wired at the heel, and I did not wake him to ask, I found a stub of pencil and a torn sheet from the back of his journal, and I wrote out a bill of sale the way I'd seen them written at trading posts. Quarry, acreage, consideration paid, and I signed the old man's name to it in a hand steadier than my own, and under that I signed mine. No court in the territory would have called it legal. I knew that plain as I knew my own boots. But I had watched that old man stand in the door of his shack and talk about ground that was his before it was anyone's. And I had decided, somewhere on the switchback with the rope burning through my palms, that his word was going to be worth more than any paper the company had ever filed. In the morning, I put the bill in front of the stonecutter and did not tell him how new the ink was. The stonecutter read it twice, folded it once, and put it in his coat without a word about the ink. That was the end of it, as far as he was concerned. Paper was paper to him. Stone was the thing he cared about. My brother found the rest 3 days later. The old man had left his tin box with us as collateral against the wages he owed nobody could pay. 11 months at $1.10 a day, by his own tally, scratched into the lid with a nail. My brother went through it while I was greasing the wagon axle, and he came out to me at dusk with a photograph held flat between 2 fingers like it might crack if he closed his hand. It was the old man, younger, no stoop in him at all, standing in front of a rock face with a crew of 6 men and a hand-lettered sign that read Founder Quarry and a date penciled on the back, 1854, 32 years gone. He was not a watchman in that picture. He owned the ground. Under the photograph was a letter, the paper gone soft and brown at the folds, the hand on it careful and slow, the kind of hand a man uses when he is writing something he means to keep. It named a partner, a man who had come in with capital in 1858 and gone out 4 years later with the deed. And it named the assay reports the partner had commissioned from a firm in Denver City, reports that came back calling the ribboning in the stone a structural flaw, a thing that would crack any slab cut wider than a hearthstone. The letter said plain what the old man must have said to no one for 30 years, that the stone had never failed, that the partner had paid for the finding before he'd paid for the digging, that the buyout that followed, 40 cents on the dollar of what the claim was worth, had been dressed up as mercy. My brother held the letter out to me like it was hot. I did not say much. I remember the wind coming down off the ridge with the first cold edge of the season in it, and the mule shifting its weight against the picket line, and I remember thinking that we had sledged 11 slabs of that same stone down a trail that had nearly taken my brother's arm off, on the word of a stonecutter and the strength of a lie I'd forged myself. And none of it had been a lie at all. The flaw had never been in the rock. It had been in the men who said so. I folded the letter back along its own creases and put it in the box with the photograph, and told my brother to put the lid on tight and keep it under the wagon seat, where the rain couldn't reach it. Neither of us slept much that night. I lay listening to the mule and the wind and thought about the old man's hands, how steady they'd been, signing nothing, owning nothing, watching a company auction off wages he was owed to men who'd never met him. Morning came gray, no frost yet but close to it, and I sat on the wagon tongue turning the whole thing over the way you'd turn a coin looking for the counterfeit stamp. Here is what I could not get past. We had told buyers in Granite Forks that the ribboning ran true, that it was color and nothing more, cut with the grain, like the old man said. We believed it, but believing a thing and knowing it are different animals, and I had learned that difference the hard way, watching men swear to assay reports that turned out to be paper and nothing else. If the stone was sound, we were the 2 men in the whole territory who had bothered to find out. If it wasn't, if that iron ran deep instead of skin deep, if it split along some hidden seam, the way the company's men once claimed, then every mantle we sold was the same lie dressed different, and we were no better than the partner who'd salted the reports 30 years back to steal a mountain from a man who trusted him. My brother came and sat next to me with the tin cup and didn't say anything for a while, which was his way of saying He'd already thought it through and wanted me to catch up. "We could ask," he said finally. "Ask who? Ask what?" "The cutter. Have him take a saw to one more, deep as he can go, past where he cut the mantelpiece. See what it looks like 6 inches in, instead of 2. I turned that over. It made sense the way most true things make sense. Plain, once somebody says it out loud. But the cutter in Granite Forks had already told us straight, back in March, that he did charity work exactly once, and this had been it. A man doesn't run a shop on faith. He runs it on cash laid on the counter, and we had none to lay. "He won't do it without money up front," I said. "You know that." "I know it. And we don't have it." "I know that too." The mule stamped and blew, and somewhere down canyon, a magpie was going on about something. I thought about the 11 slabs sitting under canvas at the base of the switchback, the rope burn still healed pink across my brother's forearm, the watchman's letter folded into its creases in the tin box under the seat. I thought about how easy it would be to just keep selling, to let the mantle we'd already moved stand as proof enough, and how that ease was exactly the shape fraud always took. A thing simple enough that a tired man stops asking questions. "We test it," I said, "even if it costs us the winter." My brother nodded like that settled something, though neither of us had the first idea where the money for a cutter's time was going to come from. Not with the rifle already gone, and not a soul in that town who'd extend us credit on a mountain full of stone. Nobody trusted yet. We took work where we found it. Granite Forks in October had enough coming through on the rail spur that a man willing to swing a maul or load freight could eat. I split cordwood for the mercantile at 4 bits a day. My brother swept the depot platform and loaded crates for the station master, 6 days a week, hands going raw in the cold, before we'd even seen frost on the ground proper. We slept in the loft above the livery for $1 a month, the mule below us stamping through the night, and we counted what we had every Sunday evening by lamplight, like it might have grown on its own. It didn't grow fast. 4 bits here, 6 bits there, firewood money and freight money, and none of it moving quick enough against what a cutter would want to put a blade to good stone. By the first week of December, we had $19 set aside, and I knew $19 wasn't going to buy a man's time and his tools and his patience for a stone the whole territory had already decided was cursed. I did the arithmetic more nights than I care to say, sitting up after my brother was asleep, the lamp turned low to save the oil. There was one thing left that carried weight in this town. It hung on a nail by the ladder, wrapped in oilcloth, cleaned every week, whether it needed it or not, out of habit more than sense. I took the sharps to the pawnbroker on a Tuesday, the 21st of December, while my brother was still at the depot. The broker turned it over twice, checked the action, asked was it stolen. I told him no, told him it was ours, free and clear, which was true. He gave me $18 and said I could redeem it inside a year for $22. I didn't tell my brother that night, or the next. I told him we'd come up short on kindling money and needed to watch the flour. He believed it because there was no reason not to. I carried the shame of the lie quieter than I carried the money, folded it down small, the way you fold down anything you mean to open again later, when there's less at stake in the room. By the middle of January, we had $37 against a cutter's fee, and I still hadn't said a word about where 18 of it had come from. My brother noticed the nail by the ladder was bare, and asked once, offhand, mending a boot by the fire. I told him the rifle needed cleaning at the smith's. He nodded and let it lie, the way he let most things lie that winter, trusting I'd tell him when telling mattered. I told myself the same thing. I just didn't yet know how long a winter could stretch before a thing like that stopped being patience and started being cowardice. The cutter came up from Granite Forks on a Thursday, the 4th of March, riding a spring-boned gray mare that didn't like the switchbacks any better than the mule ever had. He was a narrow man, named for a saint I never asked after, with hands scarred pale across the knuckles in the particular way stone cuts a man who spent his life close to it. He walked the stacked slabs for the better part of an hour, without saying much, running his thumb along the ribboning, like he was reading a brand on a steer. My brother stood back with the watchman, and I stood close enough to hear the cutter breathing through his nose, slow, the way a man breathes when he's deciding something that costs him. He said he'd cut one slab, not for cash, 2 years against whatever we sold once it was cut, split by a figure he wrote on the back of a feed receipt, and made me sign twice. I signed it once for myself, and once again, in the name that wasn't mine to write, and felt the same small, collapsing shame I'd carried since December, folded now inside a bigger one. Because at least this time, my brother watched me do it, and didn't ask why the second signature looked the way it did. The cutting took him 2 days. He used a wire saw and water hauled up from the creek in a barrel, lashed to a sledge, and he worked slow, the way the watchman had always said a man must work slow if he means to see what's true. I didn't sleep the second night. I stood in the shed doorway past midnight and watched the lantern light move against the canvas he'd hung to keep the dust down, and I thought about 11 months of unpaid wages, and about a nail on a wall with nothing hanging from it, and about how a man measures out his lies in dollars and tells himself it's arithmetic. He finished at noon on the 6th. He wiped the face down with a wet rag and stepped back, and didn't say anything for a long moment, and neither did we, and then he said the vein ran true the whole depth of the cut. No fracture, no rot. The staining lying flat along the grain, the way iron lies in stone, that was never flawed to begin with, only slandered. The watchman didn't speak. He put his hand flat against the stone the way a man touches a horse he's known a long time, and left it there, and I looked away because it wasn't a thing meant for me to watch. By the end of the month, word of it had already started down the mountain ahead of us, carried by a cutter, with no reason to keep quiet about a vein worth cutting again. The mantle took shape through that summer of 1888, and by the second week of August, it stood near finished in the stonecutter's yard at Granite Forks, pale and veined, waiting on a buyer who'd already put down $10 against delivery. Tuesday the 14th, a gray afternoon, the kind of sky that never decides to rain and never decides not to. I was checking the fit of the surround when a man in a good coat came through the gate, like he owned the ground under it. He stopped at the mantle. He put 2 fingers on the ribboning and traced it slow, and I watched his face do the arithmetic before his mouth did. He said he knew that stone. He said he'd know it anywhere, the particular lie of the iron in it, and he said it, the way a man says a name he thought was buried. I didn't answer him. He said the quarry had no clean title, and everyone who mattered knew it, and a bill of sale with an old man's mark on it wouldn't hold up in front of a judge who wanted a reason to side with a company. He said this without raising his voice. He had the kind of calm that comes from never once having had to raise it. He said 1/3 of the profit, going forward, and he'd forget he ever saw the yard. The stonecutter had gone quiet at his bench. My brother had stopped with a rag still in his hand. I noticed I had stopped breathing, and then I made myself start again, slow, through my nose, the way you do when a horse is deciding whether to bolt. I told him the quarry had a founder before it had a company, and that the company's assay reports weren't geology, they were arithmetic, done by a man who needed a cheap buyout to look honest. He said that was an old story nobody could prove. I told him about a tin box in a foreman's shack, and papers in a hand that matched ledgers, still sitting in a trading post 2 days' ride from where he stood, and I watched something behind his eyes do a different kind of arithmetic. He looked at the mantle again. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he'd once been sure was worthless. He said he'd be in Granite Forks 3 more days. He turned and walked out through the gate without hurrying, and the gray afternoon closed up quiet behind him, and none of us in that yard said a word until we heard his boots stop being boots and start being just another sound the wind carried off. 3 days. I gave that number to my brother, and he gave it back to me twice as long, pacing the shed, asking what I meant to do with it. I told him I meant to use it. He asked if I'd read every page in that tin box, or just enough to sound sure of myself in a quarry yard. I said enough. That was the truth. I'd read the assay figures against the ledger hand 3 times by lamp that winter, matched the loops on the letter D, the way the man crossed his sevens, until I could have forged his name faster than my own. We rode into Granite Forks on the 2nd day, not the 3rd. I wanted him uneasy before he expected us. He was at the Cosmopolitan, taking his coffee at a table by the window, like a man with nothing on his mind heavier than the weather. I set the tin box down in front of him, didn't open it yet. Let him look at the dents in it, the rust bloom on the hinge, the kind of box that's been buried in a floor and dug back up. I opened it slow, laid the assay reports out one at a time, like a man dealing cards he already knows the value of. His own signature, 26 years younger, under numbers that didn't match the ore samples still sitting, labeled and dated, in a trading post ledger 2 days' ride east. I told him the post's clerk remembered the crates. I told him the clerk was willing to say so in front of whoever asked. He didn't reach for the papers. That told me more than anything he said after. He asked, quiet, who else had seen them. I said the watchman, my brother, a store clerk with a good memory and no reason to lie for a stranger. I said that was already more people than a man wants, knowing he salted a mountain to steal it from its own founder. He looked out the window a long while. The street was ordinary. A freight wagon, a dog asleep in the dust, a woman carrying flour. He looked at all of it like it was the last time he'd get to look at anything without those papers sitting somewhere behind his eyes. He said the mantle was good work. I said it was. He said he wouldn't be troubling us again, and he said it the way a man settles a debt he never meant to pay, gritting it out because the alternative costs more than pride can carry. He didn't shake my hand. He put his hat on and walked out into the street and got smaller against the mountains until he wasn't anything at all, and I sat there a long minute before I put the papers back in the box. Careful, the way you'd handle something that had finally done the work it was buried for. The old man lived long enough to see the 2nd mantle go out the door, and the 3rd. He sat by the shack stove most days that fall, and my brother read him the receipts out loud like scripture, the buyer's name, the price, $22, $30, the ledger filling up under a name that was his again. He didn't say much about it. He just nodded, and once he put his hand flat on the tin box like he was checking it was still there. He died in January of 1889. Snow had the pass closed a week before we could get a man up to help bury him, and we buried him ourselves instead, in ground we had to chip at with the hand axe before the shovel would take. We put no stone over him that winter. We put one the following spring, cut from his own mountain, plain, his name on it, and the year he first worked that quarry, decades before either of us was born. It still stands there. I'd guess it stands there now. We stayed on through 1890, then sold our interest to a company out of Denver that had the money to run it right, and we took the cash and did what we do, which is move on. In August of 1893, the rail brought us back through Granite Forks, and the town had grown up around itself the way towns do. There was a bank with marble steps, there was a hotel with a fireplace in the lobby, and I knew the stone before I asked, the pale gray with the faint rust ribboning through it, like something bled into it once and dried there. The clerk called it Granite Forks marble, like it had always had that name. Nobody in that lobby knew there'd ever been a question about it. We didn't correct him. Some things don't need saying twice once they're finally true. I think about the old man more than I let on to my brother. 2 years we waited on that cut, not knowing, spending what we didn't have on the hope of it. That's the part nobody tells you about patience. It isn't a virtue. It's a bill you pay before you know what you bought. What we bought was a dead man's name back, and a stone that was never flawed, only slandered by somebody who wanted it cheap. If you've got a debt like that in your family, one owed to somebody who didn't live to collect it, tell it in the comments. We'd like to hear it. Subscribe if you want to keep walking these mountains with us. There's always another cabin nobody's opened in 50 years, another name waiting to be read right.